IIIT on Leading While Muslim, the Experiences of American Muslim Principles After 9/11, written by Dr. W. Almontaser, and with Secretary of Education Atif Qarni, posing Q&A to her. And so I would like to welcome one of the founders of IIIT, Dr. Hisham Al-Talib, to give you some welcoming remarks, but first I'd like to tell you a little bit about him. So Dr. Hisham is a founder and president of IIIT, the International Institute of Islamic Thought, and author of numerous books. He was born in Mosul, Iraq in 1940 and grew up in a religious Muslim family. While a student in the United Kingdom, Dr. Al-Talib collaborated with other Muslim students to form the Muslim Student Society of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. After immigrating to the United States with his wife, where he pursued graduate studies in electrical engineering at the University of Cincinnati, Ohio, and Purdue University in Lafayette, Indiana, he obtained his MS and PhD in electrical engineering. Throughout his career as an electrical engineer, Dr. Al-Talib was active in Islamic work in North America and continues to work in this field today. In Ohio and Indiana, while studying and working in engineering, Dr. Al-Talib became the first full-time director of the training department of the Muslim Students Association of the United States and Canada, the MSA, from 1975 to 1977. Dr. Al-Talib was a founding member and director of the SAR Foundation from 1983 to 1995. He co-founded the International Institute of Islamic Thought in 1981 and is currently vice president of the Child Development Foundation. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Hisham Al-Talib.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome again to the IIIT. Well, I want to tell you our story. As you know, there is a mother for everything, and our mother is the MSA of the United States and Canada, the Muslim Student Association of the United States and Canada, where it was founded by students, some of the founders of IIIT in 1963. And I joined actually in the US, this MSA in 1968 when I left Iraq to get my master's and PhD here in the United States in electrical engineering. Now this organization was blessed with growth and many achievements and fast. So in the beginning of the 70s, actually in 1971, some of us from the executive committee of this MSA met in my house at Purdue University to discuss the future of this organization because it was, going so well and so good. So they said the question was, what is the future of the MSA, the students here, Muslim students, and the Muslim community in the United States? So they said we have to have 4 necessary and sufficient conditions to exist and flourish and expand in this great country. Number 1, we have to be financially independent from any government. Number 2, we have to have some presence in the media so that we speak about ourselves, not others will speak about us. Number 3, because of the expansion, this rapid expansion, we must adopt the best state-of-the-art in the state-of-the-art in management and administration, which we have here in the United States. And number 3, we must have reformation and renewal of Islamic thought. But what we mean by that is not renewal of the scriptures, because those are constant, but renewal of the interpretation depending on time and space. And while the first 3 can take 1 decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, the last one, renewal and reformation, is always work in action. It's always going and developing, and it will never end. Okay, so that is, we identify this. How do we do it? We said we don't know how to do it. So then there is a verse in the Quran that says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask people of knowledge if you know not. So it took us like few years. In 1977, we convened about 30 scholars from all over the world in Lugano, Switzerland for 1 week, and we discussed this. we said, first of all, what is the problem of the Muslim nation now? And we identify it as one single thing, which is the blind imitation of, we have two camps in the Muslim world. One of them is the secular camp that was established in the early 20s by the colonialist powers, and the other camp is the traditional Orthodox Islamists. Now, both of them, they were trying to blindly imitate either our golden history of civilization or the West, Westernization. And both of them failed because you cannot have a progress with just an imitation. You have to have original thinking and research into the sources as well as in the time and the place that we live in. And then we came to the, I remember in our primary school in Mosul, Iraq, Nineveh, they used to tell us the three evils of any country is al-jahlu wal-faqru wal-marad, illiteracy, poverty, and disease. And how do you solve all those? Well, we solve it with one word. The first revealed word in the Quran was iqra, read. Read, read, read. Because if you know how, that says my 5 hours are over. So if you give me just a couple of minutes, can I go for 2 minutes? Okay. So whether it is poverty or disease, you can only cure them with knowledge, reading, education, education, and education. Now, with education, we just don't mean reading the script. That's half of it. The other half is reading the universe and then combining, applying this to that and that to this, and then that's what we mean by this dual interpretation of the word Iqra. So then that is the solution. What to do? We adopted, in real estate they say location, location, and location. In publishing, they say consistency, consistency, and consistency. Now we say education, education, and education. The second education is K-12. The third one is the higher education. But one thing is missing, which is the most important, and that is parenting. The mothers that are the most important thing in this education, the first teachers and the most effective teachers. So that's where we are now. If you want to summarize IIIT, this is the one word, Iqra, read, and E plus E plus E, wassalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hisham. Now we will have Senator Chap Peterson, who will introduce Secretary Atif Qarni. Senator Chap Peterson grew up and lives in Fairfax City. He is a graduate of Fairfax High, Williams College, and the University of Virginia Law School. He's been in private practice since 1994. Senator Peterson began his political career serving on the Fairfax City Council from 1998 to 2002. He was a member of the Virginia House of Delegates from 2002 to 2006. Senator Peterson was first elected to the state senate in 2007 and was re-elected in 2015. He's running again this year for re-election and does not have an opponent. Without further ado, please welcome Senator Peterson.
Thank you very much. Before I go a step further, I want to introduce two very special people. I'm an attorney in private practice. I own my own firm, and my paralegal Sandra Luvano is here. As you may know, we represent some of the clients here in Sandra, a great super paralegal. I also want to represent Senator Jennifer Boysko. This is her area. She's a fabulous addition to the state senate. She joined us a year and a half ago? A year ago?
No, in
In
January.
January, okay, well, 9 months ago or so, but she's a fabulous senator, and we'll see, but hopefully we'll be in the majority in a few weeks, and Jennifer and I will be in a position to make some great things happen. I also have to say one other thing. I tell people, like, being a senator is not my real job. My real job is I'm a lawyer, and then I'm also a dad. My son had a football game tonight. My wife's at the game, and if I look a little bit disconsolate, it's because they lost 43-12. So, anyways, that's how it goes. But enough about that. Let me talk about Atif Qarni a little bit, because he is the man of the moment. And I'm very honored to have Atif here. He's our Secretary of Education. And before I went and decided to give this speech, I did some in-depth research on him. Back in the old days, I would have gone to the public library and kind of gone through the Dewey Decimal System, but I went to Wikipedia. So everything I read on Wikipedia, I'm sure must be true, but I know that Atif, obviously, is the Secretary of Education. Is originally from Karachi, Pakistan. Is that correct? I had not known that. And then grew up in Parkville, Maryland, before moving to Manassas. Served in the United States Marine Corps, rose to the rank of sergeant, and served in Operation Iraqi Freedom, so he's a veteran. And came back, obviously, having been honorably discharged, and started a career in education, was a public school teacher, taught at Belleville Middle School. Belleville Middle School. And in 2013, did an act which is not as courageous as joining the Marine Corps, but still pretty courageous. He ran for the House of Delegates and lost a very narrow race for the House of Delegates, but really he put his foot in the door in an area where Democrats have not been successful, and that's a seat that subsequently is now in Democratic hands. When Governor Ralph Northam was elected in 2017, one of the things he pledged, and I remember him saying this to me, was that he wanted to see a teacher be the Secretary of Education. So you had someone who's actually on the front lines of education that's going to be training up the next generation of leaders in Virginia. He chose Atif, and Atif has been a great choice. And I say that because we're here in Fairfax County, and look, I get it, we're Northern Virginia, multicultural, that's great. I went to Atif's Facebook page. It shows him out in Covington, Virginia, meeting students out there, which is the exact opposite. Okay, it's a very rural area without a lot of diversity, but it's a place that needs a lot of help. And Atif's been everywhere he needs to be in Virginia. He's representing everybody, whether or not they voted for us. And he's a great, great secretary. And without any further ado, Atif Qarni.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and thanks for keeping out all the troublemaking stuff. Trouble IT, I'm a trouble artist. Is this thing on? I don't know. Mrs. Romina, can you hear me okay? Okay, you can hear all right. Thank you so much for setting this up. Dr. Altawa, thank you so much for hosting us. Really appreciate it. So, are we going to do an introduction for Dr. Debbie in a way? So, am I supposed to just say stop at some point?
We can put it on pause for now.
Put it on pause, and then do the thing. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And then we'll start into
Yeah, we're teachers, so we improvise very easily. Thank you. Perfect.
And so shortly we will have Dr. Ilham Nasser introduce Dr. Almontaser. Dr. Ilham is the Director of Pedagogy and a Senior Researcher for the Ames Research Team at IIIT. She is also a former chair of the Peace Education Special Interest Group at the American Education Research Association and has spent over 25 years in teacher training and research in different educational settings in the United States, Africa, and the Middle East. Previously, she led the modernization of the curriculum for kindergarten in Iraq and the design and development of the first national curriculum for kindergarten in Palestine. Dr. Nasser has researched and published on education for forgiveness in the Arab world. Currently, she is the Dean of the School of Education at Virginia International University. And so now, Dr.
Please keep it short.
Yeah, it will be. Okay, it's my privilege to introduce Dr. Debbie Almontaser, and I would say Almontasera. Does anyone know what Almontaser means? The name Almontaser? Victorious. And just by chatting with her for a few minutes, I know that she has accomplished a lot, and your bio would really not represent all your work, as well as you described to me. So it's with pleasure that I introduce Dr. Debbie Almontaser. She's an internationally recognized award-winning educator. She's a speaker and authority on cross-cultural understanding. She is the author of Leading While Muslim, The Experiences of American Muslim Principles After 9/11. You see the book there. We're all going to compete to get a copy later on. She is an influential community leader and the founder and CEO of Bridging Cultures Group. Dr. Almontaser was the founding and former principal of the Khalil Gibran International Academy in Brooklyn, New York. 25-year veteran of the New York public school system. And this is how we know where you're Montasera, if you lasted 25 years in New York, so that's a good testimony here. She taught special education, inclusion, trained teachers in literacy, and served as a multicultural specialist and diversity advisor. Currently, she's the board president of the Muslim Community Network. She frequently lectures, serves on panels, and facilitates teacher and public workshops on cultural diversity, on conflict resolution, and I guess some other than conflict resolution.
You don't have to go anywhere.
And then Arab culture, Islam, Muslims in America, interfaith coalition building, youth leadership at schools, universities, libraries, museums, faith-based organizations, churches, synagogues, as well as national and international conferences. So please, let's all welcome the
And before we begin our discussion, I just want to everyone to take note that please use the hashtags IIIT Fireside Chat and Leading While Muslim. They're projected up there. And you can tag IIIT on Instagram at IIIT_Insta, Twitter at IIIT Friends, and Facebook, our Facebook page, you can search for us, International Institute of Islamic Thought. And those who post the most will be eligible to win a free book at the end of the program.
Well, thank you, Sister Amina. Thank you so much, and definitely post the subject. As Senator Peterson indicated, we do definitely check social media, so that's really critical. And you never know when your Facebook page or Twitter will be used as a resource. But Dr. Debbie Almontaser, it's a pleasure and honor to share the stage with you. And before we get started, I do want to thank the two senators for being education champions and supporting a robust education package this past year. And we certainly, really appreciative of your leadership. And thank you, IIIT, for hosting, and thanks everyone for coming out tonight on a weeknight to listen to us talk. So really appreciate that. So what I was hoping to do is that I know that at the tail end we do want to open it up to the audience to ask questions, but I have 3 questions after listening to the podcast, reading about your work. And thank you for all the work and having the courage to really ask the hard questions in the interest of serving our young people. So really appreciate that. But I have 3 questions. 2 questions that I'll ask later are some things that we're doing in Virginia which are really relevant to your work. But the first one is that you did a case study in this book. I believe you focused on about 20 school leaders and about 14 who highly engaged in the case study. And I was intrigued by your work because you have all different types of educators. You have classroom teachers, you have support staff, you have school division leaders. But a school principal, a school leader, is really the one who sets the tone and culture for a school setting. So I was really intrigued by that. So the case study, which was done, and leading a school after September 11, being a Muslim. So let's talk about that. What would you like to tell the audience about the case study?
Sure. Well, first I want to start by thanking IIIT for inviting me, and of course our Secretary of Education. Being here tonight, I was so excited when Amina told me that you actually accepted and we were able to make it. So I want to, people ask me how did I find out about IIIT, so I want to tell you the story because it's really funny. I learned about the organization through Twitter. Yes, Twitter. So I actually am on Twitter like everybody else in the world. And every day I actually get on my news feed all the different topics that I've subscribed to. And in my education feed, IIIT was there. And I was like, this is such an interesting organization. So I sent a direct message on Twitter. I'd love to know more about your organization. I just, published a book called Leading While Muslim. I'd love to come and share it with your community. And Ellen then directed my direct message to Amina.
Oh,
There's Ellen. Thank you, Ellen, for
Thank you.
connecting us. And so like a week or so later, I got an email from Amina, and I was like, oh, this is so interesting. And here we are today, so thank you, Amina. Thank you, Dr. Hisham, and the founders and people who work here for actually making this event possible. So what should I tell you about my book? Is I could go on and on and on about, about this topic, but this topic is really very important because there isn't enough data or actually research done on in public education on American Muslim school leaders, or for that matter, even teachers. So I'm actually the first to study American Muslim school leaders in public education. No one has studied this body of people within the American Muslim community, and for that, also the fact that there aren't teacher studies focusing on American Muslim teachers as well. So what intrigued me was actually my own personal experience as an American Muslim school leader who founded the first Arabic dual language public school, the Khalil Gibran International Academy, and made international headlines in 2007 when the school was actually announced. And because of the onslaught of Islamophobia that came from interest groups, particularly the Islamophobia industry, the mayor of the city of New York actually pushed me out of my position. And they gave me an ultimatum, either to resign or the school wasn't going to open. And so there was nothing more important to me than to see this institution become a part of the American fabric. So I submitted my resignation letter. I waited for the school to open. I tried to re-engage with the mayor, with the Chancellor of Education, and they were not interested in talking to me. I was contacted by 7 lawyers from across the country who wanted to take my case. And I actually ended up suing the city of New York. And in 2010, I was vindicated by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I was granted the opportunity to go back to the school, retroactive pay, but at that point I said, you know what, the world needs to hear my story. And so I really took that opportunity to speak nationally about the racism and bigotry that exists in our country and making sure that this does not happen to other communities. And so I went into my PhD program. I was interested in actually looking at dual language programming and to see what Arabic studies are there in public education. And a colleague of mine at Columbia University said, why would you do that? Why don't you look at American Muslim school leaders and see what their experiences are? In New York, I only found 3. And so I really had to cast the net very wide to find people. So in total, I only found 20 across the United States.
Can you give us context of, so there's 3 public school leaders, the principals that you're talking about in New York?
In New York City, yes.
In New York City, and
Mhm.
how many schools are there in New York City?
There are over 1,500.
3 or 5?
Yes. So there were 3, myself, and then there were 2 others who actually left the school system because they just could not continue working there. But what was very telling was that I only found 20 across the United States. What does that tell us about public education, right? We are all working to ensure that every child in our classroom has someone that looks and sounds like them. But that's not the case. And we know that when we look nationally at the demographics of those who are leading schools, they don't yet match the very students that are sitting in our classrooms. And so it means that we really need to do a lot of work to diversify the workforce, from educators to actually school leaders. And so of the 20, only 14 agreed to participate. And the reason that it was only 14 was because many of those 6 felt that their story was so unique that their superintendent would actually be able to figure out it was them, and they were terrified about losing their jobs. And I really couldn't win them over to participate. And the people that did participate in this study, it took me weeks to actually earn their trust and get them to actually be a part of it. But there was a great deal of apprehension with the few that are actually highlighted. So the book features 4 case studies, but it brings out the entire data of the 14 individuals. And so what I wanted to know with these American Muslim school leaders was whether or not the political discourse, which we hear every day, the global events that are constantly happening everywhere, and the media coverage of Islam and Muslims was affecting their leadership and spirituality. Now, my advisor is like, well, this is an education leadership program. Why are you bringing religion into this? And I'm like, I have to bring religion into this because, you know, Islam is a way of life. And many people who are Muslim and observant actually get their inspiration to be leaders and servers and, you know, connected to the world through their faith. And I said, this is not anything unique to American Muslims, but this is also a Baptist Christian tradition where there are a lot of Baptists who believe that they are inspired by their faith to serve people. And so there's a great deal of studies that have been done on Christian Baptist school leaders who actually share that their faith inspires them to do the best job as school leaders. And so I was able to bring that in and incorporate that to help them understand the importance of actually including that. Now, because I was the first one to actually study American Muslim school leaders, I had to have a foundation for the study. And so I looked across the world to see what the experiences of others were in Europe and Canada, and I found very little information, close to nothing. But then I also looked at the African American experience, the women's experience, the Catholic experience, the Jewish experience, Japanese Americans. And then my advisor and I sat down and he said, you know what I see here that is really a common thread, and that is bigotry. And for you to continue with this, I think you should just use the Catholic and Jewish experience to lay that foundation. And what was really interesting is I was compiling my literature review, as I read about the Catholic experience and the Jewish experience when they first migrated to the United States, it was no different than what was happening right now to American Muslims. And there were a number of incidents that I said to myself, oh my God, I have to read this over. Wait a minute, this is actually happening to us right now. So it was really painful to see that, but what was really inspirational and gave me a lot of hope, Atif, was the fact that these two communities struggled, but they worked really hard to become integrated into American society and now are in influential roles as Americans. And so it gave me hope that our community, you know, will certainly have that silver lining. And I mean, we already are. We have you as, you know, the state education secretary for the state of Virginia. So it's a matter of having more like you, more like other educators in the room that are actually showing up and serving, not because they're Muslim, but because they're just like anybody else, human beings who care about education.
Thank you, that's great. Of course, I have a lot of questions and thoughts swirling in my mind, but in the interest of time, I wanted to continue to focus on 2 remaining questions because they go beyond just the Muslim diaspora, right? Overall, as educators, what really intrigued me is that you talk a lot about social emotional learning, and that is
Your microphone is not there.
equity. Sorry,
Your
can you hear
microphone
me?
is not working.
Yeah, it would help if it was on, right? So can you hear me now?
Yeah, you can.
Sorry, I must have accidentally pressed stop.
I think you
Good, right?
did.
That must
Good.
be good. Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So one of the things in Virginia, we have this cradle to classroom to career approach to provide a seamless pathway as we are going world of how we accredit our schools. Education advocates, all the decision makers and so forth, they've really emphasized looking at everything they do through a lens of equity, in both local communities, but also at the state level. And also really emphasizing social emotional learning first. So we're trying to transition from high stakes testing to a culture of more deeper learning. So that really resonated with me because in your work you talked a lot about social emotional learning. So can you talk a little bit about your work in that space, and so the audience can learn more, and what do you mean by social emotional learning?
Absolutely. So, for me, social and emotional learning means that you are able to show up in your whole person, right? You cannot get to the school building and check out 2 or 3 of your identities. Once you do that, then you're not your complete person. And so for me, the social emotional learning is being able to create an environment where a child walks in and is able to straddle the multiple identities that they are. So for example, in the case of American Muslim children, we have children who are, Bengali and Muslim. We have children who are Syrian and Muslim. We have a variety of students, from different parts of the world. And it's not just to talk about, Muslim children, but even children who are, of immigrant backgrounds from, other countries, Latino countries, etc. There needs to be an opportunity for a child to show up in their wholeness, and be able to be welcomed and embraced and valued and celebrated. And so in order for us to do that, we actually have to set the example, right? And lead by that example. And that means that we as educators and even as administrators have to set the bar high for our school districts to actually make sure that we are hiring teachers that reflect the diversity of the student body, hiring school leaders that reflect the student body. Once we do that, then we are really fully understanding the social and emotional needs of the very children. There is nothing more powerful than to have a teacher or a school leader who can actually relate to what a child is experiencing because of the fact that they share that same ethnic or religious background, and can actually be much more sensitive and understanding, and actually be in a place of negotiating culturally what it means to be culturally competent. A lot of times we have educators that are well-intentioned and want to help, but sometimes do more damage than do good. And this is something that I think that we're challenged with in public education because we have not invested in cultural competency. To really fully make sure that all of our educators are fully trained to be able to work with the diverse student populations. And I think right now for us as a nation, considering the refugee resettlement that has happened in the United States and Mid-America, there are many, many school districts that really didn't know or understand these students and their families. And were being very judgmental and really not understanding to meet those families and those children where they were, but simply trying to get them to conform to American culture when you can't conform overnight, It takes a while to learn the language, to learn the cultural nuances, but nobody should actually be forced to become anything that they're not. And I think that comes also with the social emotional learning that we really need to work on. So in New York City, I was actually invited to sit on the Diversity Advisory Group, which was actually appointed by the New York City Council because our schools in New York City became segregated. And it's not that, people chose to live in communities and send their children to specific, cultural or racial background, but just because of the economic cost of living, rent, and what have you, that unfortunately happened. And there were advocates that were saying, what is going on? Why have we reverted back to what we were when we should actually have diverse schools? So the City Council commissioned this diversity advisory group, and the role that I played was to actually give voice to a lot of the communities that educators as well as the school system and even advocates didn't understand. And I'll give you an example of this. We started to talk about the demographics of where people lived. And so we had someone who showed the maps of the different boroughs. And someone pointed out an area and said, well, this is actually a Caucasian section of Brooklyn. And I knew that section, and I was like, well, let's just hold up a minute. I don't think you can call that whole section Caucasian. And they're like looking at me like, what are you saying here? I said, there are a lot of Arab Americans that live there that are Muslim, and they don't have the privilege of being white or Caucasian. And they in fact face a lot of discrimination when it comes to housing. And so we really need to understand, you know, what the dynamics are and what these demographics are for us to fully understand. And so that moment, people later came to me and said, thank you so much, because we didn't understand that. And you're absolutely right, because they were shocked that Arabs were even under the category of white, you know, in the census, and I was like, yeah, but they're not treated with that same white privilege. Another aspect was looking at the demographics and the Asian population. Now, what they've done for the Asian population is they've clumped everybody there. And I was like, well, let's break down what this Asian population is. And I started to break it down for them and point out that, okay, Bengalis are majority Muslim, Pakistanis are Muslim, there are a lot of, you know, Indian Americans who are Muslim. And again, just another moment of like really helping them understand that we cannot generalize about these communities, and we really need to be culturally responsive to get to know the very children that are sitting in our classrooms. And the most powerful tool that we have to actually do culturally responsive education is the very children in our classrooms. Giving them a voice to share about their culture, about their customs, about their traditions. And this is something that I've been pushing for a very long time, but now has become validated by the National Social Studies Association, where in 2017, they added a supplemental guide to the Social Studies Common Core curriculum, saying we need to include religious literacy in our teaching. And when I saw this, I literally was like, finally, somebody heard me, that this is important. And so what their reasoning for Atif was they saw a lot of bigotry happening. And both you and I know that the highest incidence of bullying and bigotry actually happen in a K-12 setting, and then after that is actually a university setting. And this is not according to Dr. Debbie, this is according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, which actually, you know, did extensive research on this and pointed this out, that these are the two areas that have the most incidence. So if we have religious literacy where children are able to learn about the very students in their classrooms, then we mitigate all those negative perceptions, right? And we actually build an environment and a culture of caring, nurturing young people who wouldn't see their peers any different than themselves. I'm sorry, I feel like I just went on and on.
No, that's all right, that was great.
Why don't you speak to the mic and turn to us?
Sorry.
Sure, yeah, we can do that. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay.
So, you touched on a lot of what my third question is gonna be about. You can hear all right? Is that okay?
This is much better, yes.
That's great. So, in Virginia, in the Commonwealth, we are, you know, one of the most, if not the most historic state. We have a lot of history, right? Since our inception, we've had a very complex history based on human exploitation, the arrival of the first African slaves. There's a lot of history here, and we touched on segregated schools, and even within schools, you know, there's a lot of, you know, different cohorts that a school might be itself might be diverse. So we can go on and on about a lot of different things. Again, a lot of thoughts swirling, comments and questions and so forth. And we're doing a lot of different things to address that, to address a lot of different inequities. Even like in Fairfax County, which is the largest school division, we have some of the best well-resourced schools, and then some of the schools a few miles down the road might not be as well-resourced, and we have that, like Thomas Jefferson High School. If you have not heard of it, it's probably rated amongst the top 3 high schools in the country. But so that's where my question is going to lead, is that population at Thomas Jefferson High School is 70% Asian, right? Only 2% Black and Latinx, right? Only 1.4% of the students are from communities. So one of the things in the Commonwealth as we're doing an analysis is that yes, there are all kinds of issues with housing and with all the different policies, school boundaries and so forth, but with all the diversity that's within the Muslim community, you know, how, because in some, you know, subgroups of Muslim communities you find groups that are quite affluent, generally, you know, not to generalize, and might be going and really benefiting from well-resourced schools, while others might not be, depending on, you know, when their families moved here, depending on what their different cultural backgrounds and stuff. So there's a lot of nuances to that, right? You can't really generalize. So how does collectively, it's a very difficult question, but collectively, because we are here at IIIT representing a very diverse group and so forth, collectively, how does the Muslim community create a robust conversation about these inequities? You know, how can we engage not only our school administrators, but other educators who are in public education or Muslim? How can we strengthen their ability to really articulate for all children, but have a robust conversation with given their perspective, you know, as a Muslim educator, that but these are the things I'm seeing from my perspective. How can we add to the conversation?
Well, that's a really great question. Thank you, Atif, for asking that. First and foremost, I think what needs to happen. I'm going to look at you, Dr. Hisham. There you go. Good?
Yes.
Okay, Chad, I'm going to talk to you. I think first and foremost, what actually needs to happen is that we need to take social responsibility for public education. And when I say the we is actually the American Muslim community. And why I say that is because we as a community on a national level have invested so much time and energy on creating Islamic schools that we have forgotten the forgotten children of the American Muslim community. And that is all the children that are in public education. Not every family has the privilege or the financial means to put all of their children in an Islamic school. If you have a family of 3 or 4 children, you can't afford it unless you and your wife are making a lot of money to be able to do that. So we have the largest number of students right now in the American Muslim community are in public education. There is no policy work being done on their behalf. There is no education that is being provided to their teachers, to their district level administrators, and that is the thing that really needs to happen. And so what my book does is it actually outlines some policy recommendations that communities should be engaging in. The fact that we have communities that live in a large population of Muslims in a school district and they don't have the Muslim holidays on the school calendar is a failure of our community. That community should be organizing and mobilizing and getting their school districts to recognize the 2 Muslim holidays. We did it in New York City with a school system that has over 1 million children. And within that 1 million children, 1 in every 6 children is actually Muslim. It took us 15 years to do it, but we got it done. Our next initiative right now, thank you, is actually halal food in public schools. This was a 3-year campaign that we led and we fought for, and we got the city council to allocate $1 million for us to pilot this. Now we're going into the 2nd year. And the argument that we made is no child should go hungry. No child should go hungry in the United States. And Muslim children can't be expected to eat peanut butter and jelly and cheese sandwiches for the rest of their lives. And we were able to get that money allocated, and actually the pilot went successfully, and now this school year we're doing the same. So what it requires of us is to actually take social responsibility and start organizing But when I say organizing, not just about the very issues that affect our own community, but the issues that affect all children. Every child in public education should have the opportunity to an equitable education, whether they live in this district, or this zip code, or that zip code. And we should be actually making sure that state legislators are allocating the appropriate funds and making sure that it gets to every school to provide children that equitable education. The other thing we need to do is also to make sure that our staff are trained, right? You can be treated, separate but equal if your teacher is not recognizing who you are and where you come from and valuing that diversity. So that's really critical for us to also understand and really work closely with school systems to really get them to that point of understanding. So it's very, it's very nuanced, and it requires a lot, but I think we could do it. There are places across the United States that parents are actually organizing and mobilizing, and that we can join in those forces. And so if you win my book tonight, you'll actually see the recommendations in the back of the book that really talk about what is the agenda. The agenda for us as American Muslims, as well as all of our allies who genuinely care about our children getting a fair and equitable education. And so when I, propose or lobby for religious literacy, it's not just about the American Muslim community. I want the Sikh community to be able to benefit from this. I want the Hindu community to benefit from this. I want, every religious background to benefit from it, from simply being able to share about their faith tradition, what their customs and practices are, incorporating literature that talks about these diverse religions, so that way our children will have a better understanding of who the person is sitting next to them. And when we do that, then we are providing our young people with a worldview to be able to navigate the world globally. And so that's really critical for us to really think about this. And I'm going to stop here.
Sure, that's good.
Yeah.
Do we have time for questions?
Yes,
If it's all right with you, if you want to have questions for either one of us, if Dr. Debbie has raised a lot of great points to see if what's happening in Virginia, Virginia-specific questions, if it is general, broad questions. She's raised a lot of issues, very, very important issues. So please feel free to, and if yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
And so for everyone who does ask a question, please speak closely into the mic. If you speak far away, it won't take up.
This is supposed to be fireside chat, right?
Yeah.
Where is the fire? I don't see the fire.
Invisible fire.
Yeah.
Within.
Within us.
Yes.
Okay. I'm interested to know, how did you win your case against the mayor of New York? As a lesson for us,
Yeah, so.
Good attorney like Chap.
Yeah.
So, it's really, it's a very long story, and I will just briefly touch upon it, but if you really want to learn about it, there were 2 documentaries that were made about my story. One of them on HBO, which is called Shouting Fire, Stories of Free Speech, that on HBO, and then the other is called Intifada NYC, and you can actually buy it, I think on Amazon or Netflix, and you can watch the documentary, and it tells you the whole story. I do talk about my story in the book, but it's only 2 pages because I didn't want the book to center about me. I wanted to center about the 14 people. But the way that my case was won was because of the concerted effort that my lawyer put into the case. And so he worked with an employment lawyer, and they did a really great job. But the most important thing that they did was they actually worked with a coalition of organizations and individuals who were outraged by my forced resignation. So this coalition was called the Communities in Support of the Khadir Gibran School and Debbie Almontaser. And it was over 40 organizations in New York City that came together. They organized, they mobilized. Every time that the school system did a press conference about the school. They would crash and they would give my side of the story. They wrote op-eds. They raised money for a public relations firm that was, sending out stories. What they did with my lawyer is change public opinion, right? They changed public opinion through all of that organizing. And what ended up happening was the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, after interviewing me and many people who were involved in my forced removal, came to the conclusion that I was actually forced out of my position based on a small segment of the community who targeted me based on my ethnicity, religion, and nationality. And so that's how the case was won. In a short, succinct way. Okay.
So one of the issues that I think is very specific and important for Muslim Americans and other marginalized groups, whether it's Latinos, African American, and others, is the textbooks. And of course, as you know, there are lots of biases in the textbooks. And from your positions, how much do you think leaders, while Muslim, how much can they really advocate to change the textbooks? And for you, Secretary of Education, Fairfax County, Hardin County, all of these counties have been going through revisions of the textbooks, and there was a campaign to look at these textbooks, especially social studies, world religions, and others, and revise those to not necessarily just represent fairly Muslim Americans, but all groups. From your position, what do you do with that?
So, you want me to start?
Yeah, please go
Okay,
ahead.
great.
Yeah.
So first I want to start and say that we can't do it alone. The American Muslim community cannot do this alone. We need allies and partners to do this. And what do I mean by that? I mean that it has to be a coalition of educators and professionals that genuinely care about making sure that our books are representative of the very stories that really exist within our society. So one of the things that happened earlier this year in April was I was invited by the American Federation of Teachers, which is actually one of the largest unions in the United States. And I was invited to actually do a book talk. And my Fireside chat person was actually the president, Randy Weingarten. Yeah. Is your is AFP in your in
AFP is
Virginia?
big in Virginia because we're right to work, so AFP doesn't have a strong presence
Okay.
in Chicago and here, but BEA, Virginia
Okay.
Education, is a sub group for MEA. So
Yeah.
we're good.
Awesome. So the American Federation of Teachers, we did the Fireside chat, and the president prior said to me, she said, we're gonna do this, but I want you to come with ideas. I don't want this just to be a one thing event, and then we just, leave and people buy your book. And I said, absolutely, I will come with ideas. So the ideas that I went into this event were two. One, I wanted her to actually pass a resolution within the American Federation of Teachers that speaks against Islamophobia. To ensure that each and every, thank you, I got goosebumps when I saw it, to address from the highest office, right, the president's office of this union, saying we condemn any forms of Islamophobia that will target our teachers, our students, our families, and we, will, take whatever action to ensure the safety and security and the learning environment for our children, for our teachers. So she said, we'll be happy to do it. In addition to that, I had also said to her, I would love to see a Muslim caucus in the AFT, which is the American Federation of Teachers. When I was a teacher, I tried very hard in my union, the UFT, the United Federation of Teachers in New York, to establish a caucus. So what this caucus is actually union members coming together and being able to, create curriculum, to vet books, to do professional development for their colleagues, to do celebrations, to do educational opportunities to teach their colleagues. I tried very hard to do that in New York, but many of my Muslim colleagues were too afraid to self-identify as Muslim, and they're like, I'm not really comfortable, I don't know what's gonna come of this, and, after 9/11, I just wanna do my thing and go home, right? I couldn't engage them to do this. So I said to her, there would be nothing more powerful than for you, as a president, to call for a caucus in the American Federation of Teachers. So this resolution actually ends with the call for the establishment of a Muslim caucus in the AFT. So I actually was supposed to bring the magazine, the AFT magazine, to share it with you, and I forgot. I'm not such a great salesperson here. But I was actually featured in the magazine, and the whole entire magazine for this month was actually about teaching tolerance and basically teaching acceptance. So there were a bunch of articles. They did an interview with me, and then they also included the entire resolution in the magazine. But this is like what we need to do, right?
When was this?
The event was in April, but the magazine just came out this month.
This year, okay.
Yeah, this month. And I will take a picture of it and send it to you, inshallah.
So I know we have short time, but I do want to answer your question. It's going to be a lengthy response.
Yes,
Right?
please.
Is that having taught social studies, thought about this for a very, very long time. And the key actually is not in addressing textbooks and instructional resources. The key is looking at the curriculum framework and standards. And actually, what do we want to teach our children, right? And the problem with teaching history in the K-12 continuum across the country and across the globe, frankly, is that we teach in a linear and a chronological fashion without really integrating thematic things. So what are some of the themes in our nation, right? We are a nation that has struggled throughout time with human exploitation. There's a lot of conflict. So how do we, integrate conflict? And what does conflict look like? We have had all kinds of variety of things in social justice. Do we draw connections to those social justice movements, whether it's women's suffrage, whether it's civil rights, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's the American Revolution? How are we connecting those social justice movements? So one of the things we have done is that the governor signed an executive order this past year, because Virginia really can lead the way, and we will lead the way in this conversation, is that we established an African American History Education Commission. And when we were drafting the executive directive, there was a lot of conversations occurring on what the focus and the scope of this work would be. We identified 3 bucket items, is that looking at technical edits, some of the inaccuracies that we can address. Then second would be, how can we give a complete, comprehensive perspective? Because history is like, this room is where everybody has a different perspective, right? So it's like a football game. Big wrestling fans is that you have a visiting team and you have a home team, and you have the referees and players and so forth. So we're like kind of like, how can an official really facilitate? Like a teacher should be like an official that's facilitating conversations around history, so that giving broad consideration to be effective. And then third item, which I'm very particularly interested in, is that looking at culturally responsive pedagogy and how can we provide those instructional tools and professional development. So those are 3 bucket items, and then the conversation was that as the scope, African American history, why start with that? And actually, the governor challenged me a lot. Is that Atif, what about Asian American history? What about Latinx American history? What about indigenous people? What about Native American history? How do we address this? I'm like, sir, let's focus on quality over quantity. We have a lot of marginalized groups, but frankly, throughout time, the most difficult experience has been the Black experience, and we have to acknowledge that. And that there has been a lot of contributions, and we just talk about individuals, but not groups. You're talking about throughout slavery, you're talking about trillions of dollars of savings, cost savings that one group benefited over the other, right? And then that theme continues throughout and so forth. So let's start with African American history. Let's set the tone and let's create a framework. Let's look at our framework. Let's look at our standards. So this commission is focused on that, and they will produce a report by July of 2020. The reason we timed it is that every state does is that they take a content and they revise it every now and then. Virginia is going to be looking at its new standards revisions for history middle of 2020, so the timing works out really perfectly. So they'll have this very good product that will guide the curriculum framework and standards and so forth. And there are things happening in other states and so forth, and we're hoping to have a very robust model in place. So a lot of work to be done.
We have time for just a couple more questions.
I have a really quick question, Dr. Almontaser. Thank you so much for leading the path. I hear the things that you say, and I haven't read your book, but I feel like you are modeling. I'm an emerging Muslim chaplain, very new Islamic chaplaincy arena. So like you, I'm claiming my little path in the little and continuum of the chaplaincy tradition. So I'm really interested when you say you were shocked to read the Jewish and the Catholic experiences that you are seeing, like, hey, this is what we are experiencing right now. If you can share some of that you read.
So I can certainly point out to incidents. So for example, there was a lot of anti-Semitism that was actually driven by communities that made it very difficult for Jews to actually be comfortable. So some of the derogatory, horrible things that have been said about Jews, that they have horns, that just all of these horrible things that, made people within a school system not want to cater to them. In addition to that, the Catholic community experienced a lot of negative treatment, and much of that was actually through the Protestant experience and making them seem the Catholic community as actually being a satanic group, that they were not real Christians. So there are a lot of incidents that you would actually read about in the book, and one of the things that was utilized as a weapon at that time was the radio. The radio was used to propagate a lot of this negative, anti-Semitic, anti-Catholic rhetoric that existed. And so, as I read this, I could think about what's happening to us right now, and it's beyond just the radio. We have TV, we have the internet that is amplifying all of this Islamophobic rhetoric. And so
how did they overcome it?
So they overcame it, and that's a really great question, is that they actually persevered. They fully integrated themselves into American society and really, created a place for themselves. So one of the stories that I love telling about the Jewish experience is actually two boys in their bedroom one night just decided to draw a superhero. That superhero is Superman. There's two Jewish boys who created Superman. And for them, it was because of what they were experiencing in their school that they just fantasized about having a Superman that would just fix the world, that would come and save them every time something happened. And so what did the Jewish community do? They had the American Jewish Council, which actually was an organization that formed to basically start integrating themselves into American society. What they did was actually they took that prototype of what those two boys created and invested money in creating the Superman hero. It went from a comic book to then becoming a show on TV. I grew up on Superman. How many did you? On the black and white Superman? So that was like really incredible. And so, AJC's objective was to actually change the narrative about Jews in America. And they invested money and they did everything that they can to really get the community fully integrated into American society. And the same thing with the Catholic community. And so it's just a matter of us seeing what this community, what these two communities have done and replicating. So that's why I said earlier that what I saw them do gave me hope for our community. And I appreciate you sharing about your own personal experience in the chaplaincy. As I've been going across the country doing book talks, 1 in every 3 events, I actually have one person who will stay to the very end and share with me what happened to them in their workplace. And they're not educators, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they work in finance, in corporate America, and they are, they're wounded in isolation. They have no one to speak to. They have no idea how to address this. And we can't, walk around as human beings broken by these experiences. We have to really work together as a community, and this is what my book talks about, is that we as a community need to make sure that we are there for one another. And most importantly, all of our non-Muslim allies, upon reading this book, should feel a sense of social responsibility to be the interrupters of Islamophobia. And one woman in particular who came to a book talk talked about the CEO of her company came to a staff meeting and started saying all these Islamophobic things, and all she could do was shrink in her seat. And she was dreading the next meeting with the CEO and the staff. And so she shared this with me, and I said to her, do people in your department know you're a Muslim? She said, no, I never talk about my religion. I don't wear hijab. Nobody really knows I'm Muslim. And I've just kept it that way. I said, well, are there a couple of people in your department that you've formed a relationship with that you think will stand up for you? And she said, yes. I said, so what you need to do is go to work and let them know that you're Muslim. And the next time you're in that meeting with the CEO and he starts to say Islamophobic things, it's not that they need to challenge him, but they could simply interrupt it by interjecting and saying something about the topic or about work. And people will do that, especially if they know you and they care about you, that they will actually do that. And so for me to share that with her, she was like, I never thought of that, and this is a really easy thing to do, and thank you. But, there are so many other people that are experiencing this. The other thing is we don't realize the power of HR, the Office of Human Resources, and that it's actually there for you, to protect you, to be there for you. So just educating people that you have somewhere to go and report if something is happening to you. I'm sorry, I digressed.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We're good on time.
Yes, so I think that's all the time that we have for questions, unfortunately, because we need to have enough time for our book giveaway. But if you do have questions at the end of the program, Dr. Almontaser will be staying to sign books, and Secretary of Education will also be here.
Thank you. Please give her a round of applause.